Hello everyone, and thank you for joining the second annual Signal Center's Accessibility Awareness Series. Signal Centers is located in Chattanooga, Tennessee, a gig city on the Tennessee River, and ranked as one of 2019's top 100 places to live in America. Signal Centers provides technology, accommodations, and training to help individuals with disabilities live their best lives. Here is CEO Donna McConico.
Hi, I'm Donna McConico. Welcome to the Signal Center's Accessibility Awareness Summit. Last year, at our very first summit, our keynote speaker, Haben Girma, said this: "The problem is never the disability." She was right. We are living in the midst of a technology renaissance, and we must be the leaders insisting that this movement is for all. Accessibility is within our reach, and it will take persistence and creativity to fully embrace all of the possibilities that technology offers for individuals with disabilities. Thank you for joining us again this year to continue the conversation about accessibility.
This webinar series would not be possible without the support of our partner and host, Chattanooga State Community College. With an enrollment of more than 8,000 students, Chattanooga State offers more than 100 degree plans. Its digital accessibility mission statement is a commitment to provide all individuals the opportunity to use technologies. Here is Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dr. Beth Norton.
Chattanooga State hopes this conference series will inspire transformative conversations about the inclusion of all individuals in the ever-changing world of digital technology.
Signal Centers is grateful to the following sponsors: McKee Bakery, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee, Phil Hour, Electric Power Board, Tennessee Council on Developmental Disabilities, AT&T, and a special thank you to Unum for sponsoring today's presentations.
At Unum, we're committed to becoming the most inclusive, diverse, and welcoming company in our industry and beyond, which is why we're proud to support Signal Centers in their work to increase awareness of accessibility and inclusion in the workplace and community.
If you require sign language interpreting for today's sessions, we recommend you setting your video display to Grid View, which could be found in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. At any time during today's session, you can return to these options to customize your view to your specific need. If you require captioning, please make sure your multimedia viewer panel is enabled on the right side of your screen. And now, in recognition of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, Signal Centers welcomes Deb Socia, the President and CEO of Chattanooga's Enterprise Center, and Dr. Heidi Leming, Vice Chancellor for Student Success at the Tennessee Board of Regents, with today's presentation, Creating a Culture of Accessibility.
So, Creating a Culture of Accessibility, my name is Deb Socia, and I'm the President and CEO of the Enterprise Center. Heidi, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I am Heidi Leming. I serve as the Vice Chancellor for Student Success at the College System of Tennessee, also known as the Tennessee Board of Regents. I'm going to start off today and tell you a little bit about myself, why I'm here to present the work that we've done as a system on accessibility and how that has really framed a culture shift at the institutions that are comprised of the Tennessee Board of Regents system. This work began in earnest in 2014 when there was support from the Tennessee Higher Education Commission's Accessibility Task Force, and they made recommendations to the legislature that inspired all of us to think more intelligently and diligently about how we support our students' accessibility on each of our campuses. Our primary focus as a system was to make more materials more accessible more of the time. So with that, I want to share a little bit about our system. We are the largest system of post-secondary education in the state of Tennessee. We have physical locations in 90 of the 95 counties in our state, and we have 13 community colleges and 27 technical colleges that are members of our system. The governor is the chair of our board, and our board members are appointed by the governor and represent the congressional districts in our state. The chancellor is appointed by the board and the governor, and our presidents report to our chancellor. So that gives you a sense of the structure, and my role in the system office is to oversee our accessibility work since 2014, to lead that culture change with all of our institutions, and to help guide the conversation about next steps as we continue to work in an environment where the technology is changing all the time. So I'm excited to be here today to share with you some examples of our work, and know that we are just one state. Every state has their own structure for how they govern higher education, but I hope that the examples I share with you today will give you a sense of how you can really go to scale in a systematic way, multiple partners, to affect the kind of global change within a system around accessibility. Deb, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. So, and I want to thank Signal Centers and Chattanooga State as well. I'm really honored to have the opportunity to talk with you today. I got a chance to listen to Jared a little bit earlier, and I really love this shift in thinking to focus on universal design, just really proactively ensuring an environment in which everyone can thrive. And he said, we should not be designing for the average. We should create a world that meets people where they are. And I thought that was really fabulous. And as I said earlier, my name is Deb Socia, and I am the president and CEO of the Enterprise Center in Chattanooga. And on this slide, I have the logo for the Enterprise Center, for Tech Goes Home, for the Innovation District, and for the EDNI Innovation Center. Our organization runs several projects. Tech Goes Home supports folks who do not have access to the internet. We provide training, devices, and assistance to find low-cost internet access. The Innovation District works to provide opportunities for entrepreneurs, small businesses, and creatives to come together to learn and collaborate. As part of this work, we actually run an event space in the EDNI Innovation Center in downtown Chattanooga, where we support learners, creators, and doers by providing free space for folks to learn, conference space, conference rooms, in order to allow for that free expression and those networking opportunities to continue. And finally, the Enterprise Center convenes the Chattanooga Smart Community Collaborative that provides the opportunity to work collaboratively with a wide variety of organizations to find solutions to community needs with regard to healthcare, transportation, and energy. So now I'm going to change the slide. And on this slide, the title reads, As a Person, as a Mom. There are 4 pictures, 2 traffic lights, 1 horizontal and 1 vertical, a phone with a map on it, and a pack of chewing gum. I've learned about the importance of creating a culture of accessibility through experience. I'm a learner and I'm still learning. I have a couple of education degrees and plenty of certifications as a teacher, as a principal, as a superintendent, and that includes all the casework and requirements needed to teach students who are identified as having special needs. But quite honestly, the book learning has not been the most meaningful learning to me. I learned in part because I have a disability and because my children have disabilities. We all have Tourette syndrome, and if you watch real carefully, you might see a tick. And my sons have additional comorbid disorders like attention deficit disorder, learning disabilities, anxiety, bipolar, obsessive compulsive disorder, and I also have a son who is agoraphobic. So being creative for us was just part of everyday life. I'm going to give you a couple of quick stories about some high-tech and low-tech solutions we had to figure out in order to manage the variety of issues in our home. First, one of my sons bit his hands. It was an obsessive behavior, and he just bit them until they bled, literally all the time. And I finally figured out after trial and error that if I let him chew gum, he would leave his hands alone enough to allow them to heal. And I was thrilled. And I called the school and I said, oh my goodness, I got a solution. I just got to let him chew gum. And you know what they said? Miss Socia, you know gum chewing is not allowed at school. I thought, are you kidding? You don't know that children in your school are already chewing gum? So their rule was more important to them than solving this dilemma for my son. And I literally had to get a doctor's prescription to allow him to chew gum. And they required that the gum had to be in the nurse's office. Quite honestly, I gave gum to the nurse and gum to my son, and I said, don't share it. Another of my sons has a problem with evening up. In case you're unaware, it's an obsessive compulsive disorder behavior where if he bumped the wall with his right elbow, he then had to go bump it with his left elbow to even it up. And so when typing, if he typed an A with his left pinky, he had to type a semicolon with his right pinky. So you can imagine how hard that made writing anything for school. So for him, speech to text was clearly a godsend. And sometimes he would dictate and I would type. And again, sometimes the adults were the hardest for us. His high school English teacher called these supports cheating. For me personally, I can't associate color with function. So red is stop, does not compute to me when I'm in my car. However, the top light on tells me I should stop. I get that. And the bottom light on tells me I can go, and I understand that, which is really only problematic when I'm driving in a state where the lights are horizontal, and I better figure it out before I get to the intersection. Additionally, I have no capacity to understand directions. I don't mean like it's hard for me. I mean like it's impossible. The joke in my house was always that if mom has a 50-50 chance of being right, she's going to be wrong 80% of the time. And before technology, I had to purchase individual street maps, draw out my route, go for a dry run with a family member. I had to write down signs and stores and things that could help me know which way to turn. And then we got MapQuest, and that was helpful, but I still needed to do a dry run because you couldn't really tell everything from those maps. And finally, GPS, turn-by-turn directions. What a wonderful tool that is for folks like me. I still get lost, but the ability to mostly manage on my own added so much independence in my life. And we have dozens of stories like that allowed us to be more self-sufficient because we were creative and because we had technologies to support us. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that technology has been such a powerful tool for my children and for me, and certainly for folks whose issues may be far more impactful on their lives, allowing independence we otherwise never would have been able to achieve. My next slide says, as a teacher, and there are pictures of a doodle of Frankenstein, a yellow taxi cab, a pencil, a toy Lego astronaut, and a teddy bear. As a teacher, I quickly understood the importance of technology and creativity to help students be successful. I was happy to have a basket of fidget toys available to anyone who needed them, and sometimes it was me. Students who needed it had a pacing space marked off in the back of the room where they could walk. Students who really had a difficult time focusing had a seat up front near me for directions, and then a standing desk or another seated desk or a spot to lay on the floor so they could work more comfortably if they preferred. I had students with noise-canceling headphones. In fact, I had one student who could not tolerate the sound of a pencil writing on paper, even if it was all the way across the room. So she found that if she wore headphones and listened to music, she could focus and that would not distract her. In my classroom, all students had the opportunity to learn in the way they learned best, and technology was one of the key tools that led to better outcomes. Text-to-speech, speech-to-text, video tutorials, online schedules. To be honest, those online schedules were really a godsend. Timers and all the other technological interventions built confidence and enhanced my students' capacity to learn. And then I became a principal. On this slide, I have a picture of a joystick, a picture of a yellow school bus, and a picture of a young man wearing glasses and looking at an iPad. My school had many students with disabilities, and some of them were pretty significant. And I'm going to tell you a few quick stories. First, I'm going to tell you about Keelan, one of my all-time favorite students. He came to my school at 15, and his former principal told me he was profoundly developmentally delayed and would never communicate And then the district staff told me they had no interest in investing in an expensive intervention for him. He had cerebral palsy that resulted in quadriplegia, and he was unable to speak. But I always assume that my students understand everything. So I just hung out with Keelan for a few days and told him some really goofy jokes. And he bust out laughing. He laughed and he laughed. And I realized the prior school staff had underestimated him. My jokes were really bad, and he laughed. So we went on a journey to find a way to help him communicate. And eventually what we discovered is we got a button for his nose because he had some capacity to move his head. And he could use that as his cursor. And we discovered that he could read and write. He had never been given individual instruction. So imagine how brilliant this child was. He was a really bad speller, but he was an awesome joke teller. And then we had a young student of 13, and she also had cerebral palsy and was also not able to speak. And her name was Dee Dee, and she had some use of one hand. So we got her a big rubber ball with a rubber netting on it, and she could move that ball and communicate for the first time in her life. She came to school one time sobbing, just crying and crying. And she was able to tell us that the bus monitor had been abusing her, and we never would have known. And Ernest here, you can see his picture on the slide. He just wanted he wanted his own YouTube channel. We got him an iPad and taught him all the ways a person who is blind can use finger swipe accommodations available on the tool. And we asked him, after he had learned how to use it well, what it meant to have an iPad and internet access at home, and he compared it to winning the lottery. What I realized was how impactful technology was for all children and how important it is to ensure that all children have access 24/7 to tools that help them communicate, to navigate, and to be independent. And that brought me to helping to develop a unique version of Tech Goes Home program in Boston for the parents in my school. We built out the program that helped parents get a piece of hardware, home internet access, and build their digital skills. And from there, it went citywide. And Tech Goes Home is part of our digital equity effort in Chattanooga as well, where the program supports a wide range of learners. For example, we recently ran our first class led by a trainer who was fluent in ASL. This leads to my experience as the leader of an organization. This slide says "in the office" and has a picture of headphones, a desk with 2 screens, and a lovely beach scene with a woman working at a desk on a computer. I think we'd all be really happy if we could spend a little time on that beach right now. So where do I start as a leader? I think the number one issue for leaders, and that included me, was the ability to be vulnerable. Fear can often stop a leader from moving forward, from making changes. Fear that I might be wrong. Maybe I'll hurt somebody's feelings. I might not use the right words or take the right actions. And I just had to get past that and say to folks, I'm not sure I've got all the answers. In fact, I know I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to learn, and I'm willing to make adjustments when the decision we've landed on isn't perfect. I had to suspend all presuppositions, and I had to be willing to make a mistake. And I have to continue to be a learner. One of the things I did when I came to the Enterprise Center was take a look at ADA compliance. Our website was not compliant, and we brought in an expert to help. And while we now meet the letter of the requirements, we're not great. So we're in the process of entirely redoing our site to make it easier to navigate and to ensure that our content is perceivable and operable. An additional example, our building has a roof deck for the use of anyone who works or visits our building. And it's a beautiful view of Chattanooga. It wasn't accessible, and so my predecessor actually placed a condition in the lease that if the roof was not made accessible by the end of 3 months, we would stop paying rent until it was completed. It was a way to ensure that everybody did what they needed to do and that anyone who wanted to access that roof could. And we got our ramp, and it is certified compliant. We still have a lot more work to do, but being willing to learn will help us ensure a more comfortable and a more productive environment for everybody. Really, as Jared mentioned, for everyone. As a leader, I work to ensure that whenever possible, I support staff. And I realized that if I could find students solutions, I could find solutions for my colleagues. So standing desks or ergonomic keyboards or noise canceling headphones or special lighting or unique signage, that can all be put in place. But harder is the need to create office norms. Maintaining confidentiality and supporting individual needs while ensuring outcomes can be a difficult dance. And we're still working on this, but I think that if you're doing it right, it's an ongoing process and not a one-time solution. In addition, I reviewed our handbook and realized we did not have language in our handbook that protected folks with disabilities, or LGBTQ folks for that matter. So I'm going to ask you to forgive my next two slides in advance. They are full of text. I don't expect you to read it, and I'm happy to send you a copy of the information if you're interested. But I rewrote our handbook, and this slide has the new language, which has way too many words, but it talks about our expectation that discrimination of any sort will not be tolerated, and that doesn't really go far enough. At the bottom of the page, I wrote it has to be clearly stated, and it has to be reviewed yearly, and staff have to sign that they have reviewed it. Just stating an expectation is never sufficient. This slide holds the process for reporting and the consequences for not upholding that expectation. As a leader, I consider it my obligation to ensure that discrimination doesn't occur. And that expectation just has to have teeth. I have to follow through with prescriptions for improvement and/or consequences if necessary. So I need to be clear what the rules are. I need to make sure people read them, understand them, and sign them. I need to be prepared to intervene and give a prescription on how to improve. And I have to be ready to let folks go if they're unwilling to adhere to that expectation. And in all of my roles as a leader, I have discovered I've had to do all those things. When you take on a leadership position, you have to be ready to do whatever is necessary to ensure the work environment is both safe and productive. As I said earlier, I am still a learner, and I still have a lot to learn. But I hope that what I have learned has helped me to be more open to creative solutions and more sensitive to how workplace culture impacts workers, uplifting and respecting the skills of every person who works with me, yet holding coworkers accountable when necessary. And so that's what I had to present to you today, and now I'm going to pass this on to Heidi.
Well, thank you, Deb, for that introduction, and I appreciate again the opportunity to be here today to share with you all the work that we've been doing in the state of Tennessee, specifically with our college system. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was our reach in the state. But what you should know is that our system educates approximately 140,000 students annually. And so when we think about what we've been doing as a system, it's not only reaching all of the institutions, but it's also impacting the way that we work with 140,000 students every year. And our hope is that through our work, we are influencing the future direction of what our faculty and staff undertake as they're working with our students. Again, I mentioned that this work started in 2014. It came out of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission's Accessibility Task Force recommendations. In a minute, I'll show you a screenshot of our website. So if you want to read those recommendations more fully, you can certainly go to our TBR website and read that document. But essentially, what it said was we need to do a better job as a post-secondary system across the state in engaging our campuses in not only a dialogue about accessibility, but also training and assessment activities to make sure that our educational resources are more accessible to more students. So this is a screenshot of our accessibility website. It It has a summary of our history as well as several resources that I'm going to share with you today real quickly. So if you want to go back later and look at it more fully, you certainly are going to be able to do that because it is available publicly. On September 17th and 18th in 2014, the Tennessee Board of Regents hosted the first Accessible Instructional Materials and Technology Summit. And we did that in partnership with the University of Tennessee system. We brought together national figures in accessibility issues, including Eve Hill, who served as the Deputy Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division, Dan Goldstein, who was from the Council for the National Federation for the Blind, Scott Lissner, who is President of the Association on Higher Education and Disability, and many others who were featured speakers and panelists. And that really set the stage for both the University of Tennessee system and our system to have a common language and conversation around what we needed to do with accessibility. We talked about our obligations, both legally, but also looked specifically at how we serve our students with their electronic and digital instructional information. And we really wanted to start talking about how we do that proactively in an effective manner. In addition to those presentations, we had discussions and Q&A sessions with the audience that informed and reinforced the work of that THEC task force. We also were very fortunate to have 2 students share with our audience the impact of not being accessible on our campuses. We had a student from Arapahoe Community College, as well as a student representing the Tennessee Federation for the Blind, of the Blind. And so they provided really powerful insights and poignant stories of the challenges and successes that they faced. The 2-day event was designed for a spectrum of stakeholders in Tennessee, and it was senior administrators to functional staff and faculty. We had over 230 participants that attended. We also had leaders from private institutions and other governing agencies that were there. We had folks who were in purchasing offices and making decisions about software and technologies. So again, a wide-ranging audience that we were exposing to this conversation about why accessibility is so important and why we needed to do more in this space. A significant focus of that summit was on developing system-wide and institutional plans for accessibility around materials and technology, and how the Tennessee system, could work to collaborate in setting some clear expectations for our institutions. So the outcome of the event was that we developed a series of recommendation documents as well as guidance to our institutions on next steps for addressing accessibility. And that's really what I want to share with you today, are some examples so that those of you not in Tennessee who are participating could maybe get some ideas of how you could implement some of these things to, again, affect change across multiple institutions if you are in a situation where you can do that. So again, we had this summit. It was our kickoff. And then we created a task force of our own. And it began to meet and do initial assessment of accessibility work that needed to be done at the system level. I'm going to share with you in a second a document called The Features of Accessibility. It's again linked on this website that I'm showing to you right now. We developed a timeline of activities that we wanted to undertake. We created an accessibility statement, a conformance and remediation form, a WCAG 2.0 checklist, and an alternate access plan. All of those are examples I'll share with you today about how we encourage our campuses to think proactively about accessibility. And then lastly, we created an online database that allows us to share among all of our institutions whether or not something has been vetted already to be accessible, and if not, where they are in the process of becoming accessible. So I want to tell you a little bit about this document called the Features of Accessibility. It's on the screen here. Again, it's available on our website as well. But the major features of this document were to guide us as we move forward in our work. The first item that you can see there is procedures and how we develop pedagogical structures that support our students and are also accessible. Using our purchasing power, again, we are 40 institutions. We're the largest system in Tennessee. We've got some influence that we can have with vendors and publishers on making sure that when they create documents or software, that it's accessible for our use. We did a lot around training. We haven't stopped doing training. It is ongoing. We have obviously turnover every year with our faculty that has to be reinforced every year in terms of what we need to do to be accessible. We charged our campuses with having accessibility teams to really bring together a cross-functional group that can look at how well the campus is doing with accessibility and make plans to address those issues. We developed assessment tools around how you evaluate materials for being accessible. We have, again, those implementation plans every year, and we're always looking for partnerships within the system and nationally around this work. And so we've done a lot of things to help advance that. So the first phase of our work really was about gathering some data to see where we were, because we can't lay out a plan of what we need to correct until we know where we are right now. So on this slide, I have two examples of forms that we created that we asked each of our campuses to complete. The first was asking all of our campus accessibility teams to train their faculty on how to simply make their course syllabi accessible. Seems pretty easy, but a lot of faculty didn't know how to do that in Word. So we asked them to make sure that all of our syllabi, the very first document that a student even gets on expectations, be accessible. Then they had to submit to us as a system the results of that work. And that's where we were able to ensure continuity across all of our institutions in making sure that we were putting in place at least an accessible syllabi for every student. So we monitored that. The other piece was we asked our campuses to start thinking about assessing the full program or full course for being accessible. So we started with the top 30 courses for our community colleges and the top 5 programs for our technical colleges. And what they were asked to do is, again, after the faculty are trained on what accessibility looks like, both in documents, but also in the technologies they're using in the classroom, to go back to this form and submit it to us so that we know where they were in terms of being accessible within those top 30 courses. We did top 30 because most of our students are going to be taking those classes. So it's going to hit the greatest number of students. These are usually our general education courses. So they're all taking these classes, and that's where we felt we could have the greatest immediate impact. I've mentioned several times that we've been doing a lot around accessibility training. Again, we're a system office, we're not an institution, but we wanted to make sure that every faculty member, every staff member has the basics, and that we're consistent in making sure that that happens at all of our schools. So we did put together in 2016 an accessibility training course. It's online. We also did initial on-the-ground trainings. Those were done monthly for content course developers and faculty and staff. In 2020, this year, we just went back and revised our online accessible training course for faculty and staff. And I'm happy to say, as of today, it has been released and is now available, that revised course. So we're going to, again, be able to reinforce with faculty, particularly as we head into the fall semester, the need for them to go through this training course and to become familiar with what they need to put in place to be successful teachers or instructors to our students. And that's, again, something that we reinforce every year, every semester, and then our campuses have this tool at their disposal. We have other campuses who have gone much further with that work. It really depends on the resources available to the campus, but this at least ensures that we have something in place for everyone, regardless of their level of resources. We also really spent a lot of time developing tools that could be used in the procurement process. So on this screen, I've got two examples of our online database, as well as what it looks like inside the database if you were to go in there and look for a product to see if it's accessible or not. So we call this our AIMT database, and it was created in-house for us to collect from all of our institutions as well as the system office, because we purchase things on behalf of our schools, information related to how accessible that software or that technology is. And we use the WCAG 2.0 standards. Every product or software has to go through that checklist. The vendor has to complete paperwork to document where they are with their accessibility. If they're not accessible, then they have to provide documentation on how they're going to become accessible and a timeline for that work. And then we have a place where we can list an alternative action plan in the case where we have to adopt something for use because it's simply the only thing available on the market, but it's not fully accessible. And I'll share you an example of what that action plan looks like. So the nice thing about this database is that once a faculty member in a particular discipline has gone through the process of vetting a software or technology, if another faculty member at a totally different institution wants to use that, they don't have to go through the same process. It should be in this database and they can look it up and then know whether or not this is a good technology to use because it's accessible or where it is in being accessible. Now, one of the things that's tricky when you talk about faculty and their autonomy to teach courses is that we can't mandate that they not use something if it's not accessible, especially if there's not anything else on the market that they can use. But we hope that the database encourages faculty that if there is something that is more accessible than another thing they're considering, that they would go that route, because we have been reinforcing the fact that we're checking this through the purchasing process, and that those are our preferred products, the ones that are accessible. The other piece is that the vendors and the publishers have had pressure put on them to really think about being accessible, and knowing that if you're not and there's somebody else who is, they're going to be our preferred purchase. And so it is putting that pressure on the vendors to think through how to change their products to meet those expectations. So this is a partial image of the alternate access plan. It shows you what the instructions are that we give to our campuses when they develop it. One of the things that, again, we have to put in place is that if our faculty adopt something that is not accessible, they have to be thinking that I could have a student who needs that accommodation in the class, and I can't wait to plan out what the plan B is the moment they show up at the door, because then that's time that's being wasted for that student from that first day of taking the class. So what we have told all of our campuses is if you adopt something that's not accessible, create an alternative action plan that's on file. So the minute a student comes forward and needs an accommodation, you have something in place that can be immediately implemented. And that student's not losing valuable time in the class, in the course, waiting for somebody to make the materials accessible or to come up with another plan. So again, this is attached to that record in our database. And that again allows other campuses to develop that plan and not have to spend time to create something from scratch if someone else has already done that work. So I want to talk a little bit more about what we've also done with our libraries. So obviously, the libraries are the centers, the hubs of learning at all of our institutions. It's where we have a lot of resources that students use in their studies and in their research. And so we have a great group of library deans and directors who have been coming together and recognize the need that they, independently of whatever task force we put together, needed to start thinking through how they check all of those library materials to make sure they're accessible. We have some common contracts that we do across the system for different databases. So it made sense for them to share and collaborate to help ease that workload of checking all of those materials. So they've been working in earnest really for many years. They did a survey of their web-based library materials starting in 2016. Again, this is like an ongoing thing because materials change every year. But they did their own summer academy as a group, and then they did, again, assessment of those materials, and they're submitting them into that database for the benefit of all of our other institutions. I will say they've also recently agreed to look at even their web pages, right? Because a lot of these materials are linked to their web pages, making sure that those are also accessible. And so they are driving that work as a group, and thankfully are very passionate about it, and really don't need encouragement from the system office to do it. They have owned that and take responsibility because they know how important that work is. So when we think about a culture change, that's one small group that has really embraced it. We've also, like I said, done a lot even outside the courses to help our campuses start thinking about how you change the culture at the institution. So I mentioned that we did the review of the top 20 courses and the 5 programs at the technical colleges, and I showed you an example of the online form. But this slide also shares some of the other things that we've done. One of them being we did an audit of our top 20 public-facing web pages for every institution and made corrections. Again, this is something that has to be revisited every year, but at that point in time, we identified those really critical pages that needed to be made accessible. We did a textbook audit, and that was quite a heavy lift. You have to pull in all the textbooks from across all your institutions in the state and then compile that and then go back to all the vendors to see where they are with accessibility for each of those texts. But that was really informative for us because, again, gave us a tool when we go back to those publishers to talk with them about the work that we really feel they needed to do to step up to the plate and help us be more accessible. We did an audit of our admissions and scheduling, and that's a front-facing function for our students. And you think about the first thing that they do at an institution is come on to campus and say, hey, I want to be here. Well, is that process easy for them? So we did an audit of those admissions processes, how they get scheduled for classes. We encouraged our admissions office to look at their web pages through that. Any forms that needed to be filled out, is that paper form required? Is there other ways that somebody can fill that out? So that was really informative for our institutions, and it led many to start thinking alternatively about how they admit students and what's required of students. And the last thing I would say is that as we've gone through this process every year doing the reviews of the courses and the review of the programs, we got to a point where many of our courses were getting close to 100% accessible. We have to go the next step. And that is, think about the programs on your campus that have that maybe the highest enrollment or the highest number of students maybe that really you need to make sure that the course materials are accessible. And so they got to pick their program of choice and go through the entire program, not just the individual courses, but all of the courses in that program, and see where there might be gaps along the way that impact the student's progression. And so we now offer that opportunity for our campuses to do that. So now they can get to other areas outside of the general education courses. From a campus perspective, I wanted to share, we've gotten a lot of feedback through these different assessment activities that we do. And each institution is really unique. It does have to develop its own processes because it might be staffed differently. And this is a picture of the Humanities Building at Chattanooga State. Chattanooga has been one of our leading institutions in this work, have a lot more resources maybe than some of the others, but they've made a great investment there. And I would say that one of the things that we've learned, again, is that you really have to have this task force, this individual accessibility team at each campus, taking not only what we're thinking very strategically about the unique needs of the campus. So we can set out kind of the framework, which I think has been successful in leading the conversation and the charge. But ultimately, it is up to the individual campuses to do that work and to take it seriously. And those campus-led accessibility teams are very important to make sure that that is sustained over time. Again, everything changes so quickly right now with technology. You need a group of individuals that are focused on that work and constantly reinforcing with new hires and others about how we need to keep at it. I would say there's also a lot of communication challenges anytime you're going to scale with something across an entire state or a system, multiple institutions. We, have some schools that initially maybe didn't do as much work as others. Maybe the message wasn't as strong from senior leadership on the importance of the work. And so, as a system, when we're made aware of that, we can certainly step in. But a lot of times, again, that communication challenge is individual to that institution and has to have leaders that are really supporting it at the ground level. Change is always hard. And I would say a lot of campuses struggled with getting faculty to understand, no, you can't use that material that you've been using for the past 30 years in your class because it's not accessible. And it is going to take some work on your part to revise how you're offering your course. But, again, in the long run, it's for the benefit actually of all students. And really, it's not just about accessibility, but about universal design for learning and that it benefits everyone. And so it's great that the speaker earlier mentioned universal design for learning, because that's really kind of the next iteration of our work for us, is not thinking about it in terms of accessibility or accommodations, but really designing things on the front end that help and assist every student. And so that's the good news, is that we're moving into that phase of the conversation. And I would say the other piece is that we have been recognized nationally for the work that we've done as a state to scale this work. We were recognized by the National Federation for the Blind for what we did to start this conversation. And so it's not over, it'll never be over. But we hope that we are giving of how a state agency or a system can really take the lead in changing the conversation and culture around accessibility with multiple institutions. And so I think the Tennessee story is interesting because that is just one example of how that can be achieved. So I think now we're going to turn it over for questions, and I will turn the presentation back over to our moderator.
Thank you, Heidi and Deb, for those amazing presentations. So we're going to go ahead into, we've got about 10 more minutes. We're going to go into a little Q&A session. So if any attendees have questions, they can type those into the question box at the right side of your screen there. It looks like we have one here for Deb. What steps did you take when the schools were so uncooperative regarding your son's accommodations?
It's kind of funny because you always imagine the adults will be the easiest ones that it will be the children who will be difficult, and the opposite is 100% true, at least in my children's circumstance. The children were cool. The adults were difficult. So, my son got put in the naughty boy's chair at lunch because of a noise he made, but it was a tick, right? And so I had to go to the principal and say, what's going on? And she said, well, it was inappropriate. I said, well, it was involuntary, involuntary, inappropriate kind of, And so eventually I had to, even though I am an educator, I had to hire an advocate and a lawyer.
Wow.
To help me make sure my children's accommodations were made. Tourette syndrome is not like, it's not an endearing thing. It's loud, it's unusual, and it made it really hard for my children when the adults didn't set a good example.
Wow. And I think going along with this, how would you respond to some staff members when some staff members get the additional supports or accommodations they need and other staff members express they feel the situation is unfair?
Years ago, there was a video called Fat City Workshop. And on that video, they talk about giving everybody the same thing is not what's fair. Giving everybody what they need is fair. And he says, the Richard Lavoie, I believe it was, but he said, if I were in a restaurant and everybody was choking, I wouldn't do one person was choking, I wouldn't do the Heimlich maneuver on everybody in order to make it fair. You just do what you need to do for that one person. And so really thinking about helping people understand that accommodations are helping people be their best selves, be their best employee, and it's not a fairness issue. It's not a sameness issue, it's a fairness issue.
Right. Great. Here's another one. So do you have any recommendations for a person with a disability, how they should approach management with a request for accommodation?
You want to try that first, Heidi?
Oh, go ahead. It's fine.
It's really interesting because I have a disability, right? So I don't tick a lot anymore. I did when I was younger, and I don't make a lot of noises anymore either. But there are things about me that are different. However, I have not found it interfered with my job performance that I could figure out my own accommodations. If I needed an accommodation at work from someone, from my boss, I would approach them directly. I would bring information for them to learn, help them understand what the accommodation is and why I need it. I think being direct is the best way to deal with that.
Great. Is there anything you want to add to that, Heidi?
Well, I would just say, again, our work is focused more on just being accessible up front. And so it's not about necessarily just waiting for the student to come forward and ask for an accommodation. So if it's a staff member not cooperating from my perspective, it would be more about, well, why wasn't this accessible to begin with? Because we had this accessibility initiative that, it should have already been looked at. So, again, for us, we have disability directors on our campuses that are part of this work, but we were really intentional to make sure that that's not a person who's leading the accessibility work. Because again, it needed to be cross-functional, and it shouldn't shift to a focus of, well, we're only doing this for those certain groups of students. No, it needs to be accessible for everybody. So that's, again, part of that culture change that we were trying to make with our institutions is, don't think about it about, well, we only have to do this in certain cases, but think about it like it just needs to be made accessible for everyone.
Right. Perfect. So here's one more. It looks like for Deb. How would you tell future employers that you have Tourette syndrome? How have people responded? And I think that could go across the board for any disabilities, really.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of my sons got fired. He actually deserved to be fired. I can't complain about it. The job was one that started at 8 in the morning, and he had to be at work at 8, and he couldn't get to work at 8. If some jobs have flexibility and some do not. They couldn't retrofit their job for my son. He had to be there at 8. He had to open the door when the day began. And if he wasn't there, he was not doing his job. So I think it works both ways. Both as an employer, I have to find the accommodations that are appropriate for the individual. And as Heidi said, whenever possible, make those accommodations just universally available. But as an employee, selecting the job that best fits you is also part of this process, right? Finding the job that is comfortable for you. For my children, when their Tourette syndrome was the worst, I don't imagine they'd have been a great front desk attendant, right? So picking a job that was a better choice. My son is a car mechanic. It's a perfect job for him, right? Very hands-on. His language-based learning disability rarely gets in the way. And he can make all the noise he wants. Nobody cares, right? It's a good, so it's going to be a good fit, I think.
Right. So there's that two-way street there. It looks like we are getting close to the end here. So do you guys have any parting questions or anything that you would want to say, parting words, to just address all of our participants here?
I'd say if you've got something, if you can help me be a better learner, help me be a better learner. I would always appreciate folks coming to me and saying, here's what you could do that would be better than what you've done before. Here are the words you should use. Here are the opportunities you should share. I'm always looking to learn more.
Great.
Yeah, and I would just say, from our perspective, it's just the right thing to do. We need to make sure that we are helping everyone attain their goals and their career aspirations, particularly in the education environment. And so I would say, from our perspective, it is challenging. Keep at it. Don't lose hope or faith. Push the envelope, and because it is the right thing to do for students.